I'm going to begin it again. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second in our three-part series of spiritual abuse steps to healing for individuals and organizations. We are glad to have today you joining us, and those of you that will be watching this at another time, thank you. We believe that what we have to share today is going to be extremely beneficial for you. And we just want to thank Dr. Grant Jones and Dr. Beth Davis for being with us today. They're going to lead us through these various topics of this particular focus that we have that will be one that I believe would be extremely helpful. And we found that last year when we did this series during the month of January, that so many people gleaned so much to bring at least a beginning, if not lead them to a place of healing in their lives. And also to just pray and to reach out to those that may be abusers that they don't know it. And if they don't know it, how they can become aware of that so that they can bring healing in their life. Because usually people that hurt have some kind of trauma or pain in their life that they are manifesting in a way that does bring pain to others as well. And so with that, we are going to turn to Dr. Grant Jones. He's going to begin today, and then Dr. Beth Davis will join. So Grant, we look to you and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Beth. Can you hear me okay? I'm
Yes,
in the
we can.
basement here, but what an honor it is to be part of this process. Some of you know my story. It started June 12th, 2023, and so this is the culmination of a couple years of research and investigation. And so my part today is to do how to treat organizational spiritual abuse, and I think enter. There we go. Did I go too far? Okay. I just want to say up front, Michael Kruger's book, Bully Pulpit, is one of the best on the market on addressing spiritual abuse in toto. Last year we mentioned it. I'm at the point of, if you can't afford it, let me know in the chat box and I'll get it for you, because every board member, every pastor, every organizational leader should have this on his or her shelf. And maybe that's the start in treating spiritual abuse is, okay, ask the pastor, leader, facilitator, do you have a copy of the book and have you read the book? But I found nothing. And so what I'm going to be sharing today is basically, well, it is from chapter 7 in this book, and it's a summary of that. But I just want you to know the complete book is there for you. And I'm going to move this a little bit. Michael Kruger quoted, "In many places, we have forgotten the biblical paradigm of humble servant leadership and instead have attracted narcissists who abuse the very flocks they are supposed to protect." So before I get there, I just want a quick summary of why we're addressing this, because the spiritual abuse, the effects are pronounced, and I'm just going to summarize them. And taking this from chapter 6 of the Bully Pulpit, the emotional effects, fear, terror. That's one of the common themes that I've experienced in the stories that I have gathered. Just the fear of even telling the story to anybody. Lots of anger that things don't get done. They share their story and nothing gets done or gets worse. The shame, the sense is they are inadequate people. They're not good Christians. They're not good followers. They're not good church members. Lots of depression because it is kind of endogenous. It's from the environment. And then PTSD. I get a lot. I've treated personally a lot of individuals from spiritual abuse situations, and they have the full-blown PTSD as you would have somebody that's been in a war-torn situation or military situation. Real quick, this one, when you're under stress, it compromises the immune system. I've actually worked with individuals from a spiritual abuse situation where they have pseudo seizures. And once you deal with the stress, I mean, there's nothing, they'll do the testing, the medical testing, nothing wrong with the brain. But then once you deal with the stress, the seizures diminish. And so anytime you have stress-induced situations, you will compromise the immune system, blood pressure, migraines. This is where I see it as well. The relational effects, many times people are removed from the church or the organization because they're not complying with the leadership, with the bully leader. And so they're just loss of credentials, removed from the situation, loss of community. If there's a spiritual abuser in that area or in your church or organization, there are people that support that person. And if you come against that, then you lose that community. They will shame you, and even your friends definitely will begin. Well, what are you saying bad things about that person? I mean, look at the ministry. Look at the great things that's going on. How could you say those things? There's no way he could do that or she could do that. And so the friendships and having to leave the church is very difficult. A lot of our friends are in church. And then this is the part that is devastating. You have doubts about the church, the legitimacy of the church, the organization that you're part of, that you've given your life to, doubts about Christianity. Does it really make a difference? It doesn't seem to make a difference in these, in spiritual abusers. And then it goes into doubts about God. God, I've served you, and look at this friendly fire that's attacking me, going against me, and begin to question. And in the last one, even your own faith, your own, am I good enough? Am I capable enough? Is it my, especially if you've been gaslit about being in that place where it's your problem for causing that difficulty with the pastor, the denominational leader. So I just want to highlight that. It is a big deal. So let me pause here. When we start talking about the treatment from an organizational, I'm talking about church, institution, denomination. So I'm just covering the entire entity. But Michael Kruger talks, a lot of his stuff comes from the church itself. So what I'm going to share then is a summary of this. And this is the most powerful chapter I've found in treating organizational spiritual abuse. There is no single simple solution. How do you change a culture? How do you change a culture? There must be an accountability board or governing agency that is independent of the leader. It cannot be just an advisory board. It has to have some authority where they can create accountability for staff members. Do the district officials have a confidential entity for parishioners, for congregants, for employees to freely access? I don't know that. And so I'm not a minister, I'm not a missionary. So, but is there a system where the district, the organization has some procedure in place? And then the churches, the districts, the denominations, the missionary agencies must regularly intentionally teach on spiritual abuse. And I'll share more about that. But the question I've posed to everybody is, when was the last time in your church in 2024 somebody taught or preached on spiritual abuse? How many of you as ministers, pastors, teachers taught in your church on spiritual abuse? I'm going to post at some point a link for everybody here. This person talked on spiritual abuse, and we'll start developing this link for all of us to access. I know my pastor, Jim Bradford, and has done a couple, as well as Carter McDaniel, and it's been really wonderful. So Michael has several domains. He first starts with prevention. How can you begin to prevent spiritual abuse? How do you keep abusive leaders from gaining a position of power? And so search committees, missionary boards that are interviewing, institutional interviews for teachers or whatever. These are some of the things that he believes highly that we need to look at. Character over competence. We love to hire people that are very charismatic, bring great speakers, lots of energy. And so we seek candidates' character through background checks and interviews of previous supervisors. So they may have the competency. What's the character like? So do a complete background check, interviews of previous supervisors. And going along with that, is this person that you're going to hire have a history of involved in teamwork? Does the candidate want to serve and foster cooperation, or does he or she want to be in charge and have a position of power? That can be a straightforward question or when working in the interview process. And this is the one that's big one. Okay, this is probably all of us have been agencies where the secrecy has just been rather highlighted, but there's got to be accountability over secrecy. Does the church, does the organization or the missionary agency have a clear, transparent system where concerns about leadership can be expressed without fear of negative consequences? Is there a protocol in place for that to take place? If there isn't, it's really scary, because then there is no accountability and the people that are being abused have no place to go. So this is the prevention aspect. And this is the hard one, the accountability. How do you oversee church leaders once they are in a position of power? His first recommendation, you have to limit that power. If you grant someone that leader, that total power, and there's no accountability, then that's when you can go off the rails quickly. So senior leaders must have limited power and can't have the sole authority to determine agenda or to hire, fire staff. Where you work now, is it a body of folks that determine that, or is it a single entity, a single person? If it's a single person, then there's some red flags there. There must be real feedback. Annual reviews from all staff members, church members, missionaries of leadership must be a focus. These reviews. In academia, my background at Evangel University, we had KPIs, key performance indicators, to keep us on the right track. What are the KPIs for churches, for missionary organizations, for denominations? So there must be this real feedback about performance. The independent leadership must be in place. There must have a board members and governing entities that keep leaders accountable, not just yes folks. And it's real clear. Spiritual abusers that have been researched have people around them that are yes people, that are rather hesitant to confront or challenge concerns. And then there must be genuine transparency. Church board meetings, this was interesting. Church board meetings should be open to parishioners. All general minutes should be available to members of the employees of the congregation, and missionary agencies should foster open minutes of leadership meetings. This would be general practice stuff, not if there is a employee situation, but just the general practice. Are the minutes available, and do people have opportunity to be a part of that process? And then this still comes from the chapter, they shall not hurt or destroy. This is the protection aspect. What does the agency, what does the church, what does the institution do about protecting those who bravely call out the abuse? One, is there abuse training in your church, in your entity, in your organization? For the last several years, many churches, many entities have had training on childhood trauma, childhood sexual trauma. And so there's in-service training. When was the last time there was in-service training in the church denomination or entity on spiritual abuse? Is that a focus? That's preventative, but it'll lead into some other stuff that he pointed out here. Is there an accountability committee? Are there elders, non-elders, men and women that's separate from the board? And are they empowered to be a clearinghouse for reports of mistreatment, of abuse. And that's where he says there must be this posture of openness. Does your church, entity, denomination, institution have a policy, procedure? If this happens to you, here's the protocol to follow. Is it in place? Is it publicly stated? And this third-party investigation, when there are allegations, this accountability committee, he believes, should be the person, the group that handles that, and giving people voice and assurance that it is protected, it is confidential. One of the things that Michael's and others that, and I've also experienced it myself, is that when there's an allegation against a leader, spiritual abuse leader, there is a lot of investigation to help him or her and support for him or her, but not for the alleged victim. And he or she is just kind of left out in the dark. So this third-party investigation must be outside the organization. The accountability committee gives oversight with this, with some legal counsel. What are your legal procedures? I know that gets iffy, but still, that's what Michael is saying, is if we take this seriously, we must do due diligence to help make sure that the victim is being heard and guided and treated professionally. Victim-sensitive communication. Oftentimes, there's much more of an emphasis on how do we protect the abuser, how do we protect the organization, how do we protect the entity, but not how do we protect the victim. And so there has to be language. Just today, talking to somebody that, okay, who's shared the story, but it hasn't done anything with the entity, the agency that he's with, and he's not giving updates on where the process is. There must be a process for the person that's coming forward to be able to understand or to definitely communicate, yes, we're doing something, and this is what we're doing. And the final thing he mentions, and this is where Beth is going to pick up here, we must provide professional care for the long term. Some of these people that have been abused for years, it's not going to be healed in a month or two. There needs to be, the entity must be engaged and willing to stand with that person till he or she is healed and is at a place where they can manage that. So here's my last summary. These are questions that I ask all of us. Churches must educate members, preach, teach, have special events, and intentionally address the issue of spiritual abuse. When was the last time that happened at your church, your institution, your denomination? When there was a public discussion of spiritual abuse? Denominational leadership, national, state, district, parish, must make the topic a focus in their meetings, in their conferences, in their in-service training for their membership. And I'm trying to think, what denomination do you know that has had a conference to focus on spiritual abuse? I'm not aware of any, but I know I'm limited in that. Do district officials have a policy in place to investigate spiritual abuse cases? Because spiritual abuse is different than physical abuse and spiritual abuse. So sometimes some states, even certain denominations don't have you losing credentials over spiritual abuse because it's not deemed abuse in that sense. But do districts have abuse involve their pastors, workers, and be receptive and inviting of people's stories? Do you know of one in your district? And then the last thing I would say is, if you have been spiritually abused by a church denominational leadership, go with a trusted friend to a board member, the district official, or agency representative and tell your story. And I suggest this if you're being counseled by a therapist, but you need to go with somebody, and districts need to have something, organizations need to have something. This is the protocol, this is the procedure. For us to listen to your story and to begin to help you. I do not suggest going to I know we had a mention of this with Mark and had some great insights last week, but the Matthew 15 thing, going to the person. This one I would take someone with you because of the nature of that, and in talking with someone, get with some counsel before you do that.
Yeah, Grant, let me just mention, it's Matthew 18, but yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. But let me ask you this. What's come to mind as you've been sharing is, what if none of the above is there? Or perhaps efforts are trying to be made, but they're not yet in place. What do you suggest a person do, or an organization do, or people that may be in an organization that feel like, we do need to address this? Any thoughts on that?
That's two different questions. I think I'm going to let Beth do. Well, I guess it's the same thing. If you're in an entity, an agency where you believe it's going on, but there's nothing in place, that's if there's an HR department, I would start with the HR department. And there's some agencies that have that, others that don't. That would be the first place I would, and then if there's going to be a governing board, I would request meeting with a governing board, the accountability board or the supervisory board, and go with 2 or 3 people to that entity and present the case. What can we do to bring awareness to this issue? How can we prevent it? But it gets, that's the tough one, Mark, is when a person trying to make a difference and people have a hard time believing him or her. Mark, Michael talks about getting a group together and starting a grassroots movement in trying to address that issue within that entity or that agency where they're at. So you do it as a group.
Could a possible go-to, if maybe you are alone or maybe there's another, but just for a spiritual authority, would perhaps, if it's not your pastor that's the abuser, would it be a healthy thing to turn to your pastor and to talk to them about it and have them go with you?
Yes.
And
Yes.
perhaps if it is your pastor, then looking to whatever organizational structure there is there, that if it's a presbyter or a bishop or a superintendent, whatever the nomenclature is used to identify leadership in whatever organization, perhaps you go for.
Correct. And it may be helpful to go to another pastor of that organization or that entity for counsel from him or her as to what maybe could be done as well.
Right. Right. Like you mentioned, Jim Bradford.
Yes.
How he's taken this on and done it in such a Jim Bradford kind of way, so to speak.
He is walked with me through this. Yes.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Are there any questions, Mark, that before we transition, here are some great resources, gang. I try to put them under 2 different slides, and these will be posted. You can request them and I'll send them to you, but these are great slides, resources, and even Michael Kruger has podcasts that are just so awesome, that you can just download, watch at your convenience.
Yes. If you do have any questions, we've put our email addresses up there, both Doctors Davis and Jones and myself, we put our email addresses up there. So feel free to write. We've had other people from last week's webinar, many people write, and so we do respond. And if you do have any questions during the webinar today or even next Wednesday, don't hesitate to write in the chat box. We always make sure that we verbalize the question and we address the question in real time. And if we can't address it in real time, we will certainly get back to you. We don't leave anybody hanging unless it's an oversight on our part. And so far, we don't think that that's happened. And so with that, Dr. Beth Davis, I'll turn to you.
Okay, I'm moving on from where we've just covered with Grant the way to treat and to help organizations heal, which really is a much greater task. I have to say, Grant, you took on the big one. For individuals, I want to just zero in first on the area of trust. When a person has been abused in any way, I think that is one of the places to start, is they have no one to trust. There's people around them that they have trusted that have turned into people that they now no longer can even maybe be around or hear speak. So to find a counselor and a therapist after being abused is one of the key ways to heal, and yet it's not a simple one. And so I encourage you, if you have been abused, or if you know of individuals who come to you and are asking for help, that you help them find a person who is qualified to give the right kind of treatment, who will take them seriously. Again, I think this is what's happened to so many of the abused people that I have talked with in my past, is that they no longer trust organizations or people. They have a very limited number of places that they can go. So to find a therapist who can offer the right kind of counseling, I know, Grant, you mentioned that there is so much that goes on in the body and the soul and the spirit through abuse. And so to find the kind of person who can give the right kind of counseling. There's no evidence-based treatment for spiritual abuse, but it can be connected to other things like post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety. All of these things are usually a component of abuse, and so they can be treated in ways that are used for those treatments. And a good therapist will find the best therapy for you or the person that you are helping. So take your time in that. I think we all on this webinar are willing to walk with anyone that is looking for a therapist or a place to go to get spiritual and emotional help.
Hey,
That's number
Beth,
one.
Beth,
Yes.
Beth, are you sharing your slides?
Yeah. Oh, I thought I was. Sorry. Mark, are we doing slides?
You're muted, Mark.
Yes, I can pull them up for you if you like. Would you like me to do that for you?
Yes, I thought we had them up.
Here we go. Here they are.
Okay. So we've covered number one, and I'm moving on to number two. First, have a therapist, a counselor that you trust and that has that is a reliable person and can help you with your emotional and spiritual healing, as well as sometimes physical healing that comes right along with it. Schedule an appointment with a medical professional. That's number two, very important, to assess the impact that abuse has had on your physical body, on your overactive sympathetic nervous system. A lot of things go on that you will not even know about, but you will have reactions, you will have triggers, things will be going on that you will need someone to look at what has happened to you. Or again, if you're helping someone else, I'm speaking as if this is you, but it could be that you have someone in your family or a very good friend that needs this kind of advice to say, first of all, get a counselor. And secondly, look for a medical professional that can give you a good physical. Those two things are right at the top of the list. Then number three, be sure that your therapist is not only a Christ follower, but also has a good understanding and knowledge of biblical truth and theology. A lot of times what brings us into any kind of spiritual abuse is coming from the fact that a person doesn't have good theology. And unfortunately, I think in the church that I've been in for so many years, many of you are, we sometimes have people that come in that don't have a good base of theology. So like Grant has said, find the kinds of pastors or friends who can help you find the right person, because bad theology often leads to some kind of spiritual abuse. And then again, the bibliography has some powerful suggestions on intervention, and you can do a lot on your own. You can help others by becoming well-versed on what is spiritual abuse, what does it look like, and how can we help others stay away from it. We're looking now at number 5. And that is talk to others who have left the institution. If you possibly can, if you feel like you are one of those persons who are experiencing abuse, by all means, find someone else who has gone through that, who has either left the church, the institution, or maybe a community where there is abuse going on, and ask questions about their experiences. I put this line here: if possible, find a support group. I don't know where these support groups are. I think last time we discussed this, we talked about, wouldn't it be wonderful if there were places that people could go to be together who have had abuse and could maybe recover together, support one another. That is one of the best biblical principles of how to heal in any kind of abuse situation, would be to find other people and share together. And Grant, I'm going to throw this out to you for just a minute. I don't know, maybe you know of support groups in our area here, in our community. I actually don't, but I feel like it would be such a good idea.
It's a great idea, but I'm not aware of anything that is directly related to that, to spiritual abuse itself. Maybe someone in the chat can let us know something. I know we talked about it. One of my grand schemes last year was to kind of figure out a Facebook group for something like this, but that has not transpired yet. And so, but I'm not aware of any. It's spirit.
Right.
I'm not aware of. I'm not aware of any in the Springfield area. I'll say it that way.
Okay, and right now, I would say it is a talking point. In fact, for so many of us, to just be talking on a webinar about spiritual abuse is quite new. So to think about going on and saying, okay, let's pray that some support groups might come together that could help people work through these injuries. I've worked for many years with grief support groups for people who have lost close friends or family members. And I've seen the tremendous power of people who have a very safe place to go together to share their stories and find out that there is a wonderful commonality and camaraderie among people who have had similar experience. Maybe they've lost someone in an accident or through cancer or unusual kinds of deaths. And if they can come together and share their stories, it normalizes their feelings and allows them to, at that moment, begin healing. I think it is one of the greatest strengths of healing for any kind of injury, is to have other people who share with you on that journey. This number 7, only confront, and we talked about this a bit earlier, only confront the perpetrator or leadership if your therapist advises you to do so. And there again, that would certainly not be on your own. It would be with someone else. But also note that from the research that has been done, that this is not necessary for healing to occur. It might be a component of the healing. It might be a component of what needs to be done in your community, that the truth needs to be shared, the truth needs to be told to the right individuals. But you, as the injured person, may not be the one to do that. It's not necessary for you to heal. So now and then it is probably a good thing to take your story to the right person and in the right timing. Number 8, please seek out a safe community where you're accepted and validated. This is so powerful, is for healing, is to get out of the place where the abuse has been taking place and find a safe place. For so many people, if the abuse has taken place in church, they write off church. If it's taken place in a small group, they ignore the small group. My encouragement would be to find a better place, because you need people, and isolation is not going to heal abuse. When you share your story, it can be very validating and very therapeutic. I find this, even as we've talked with missionaries through the years who have had traumatic things happen to them, maybe not abusive things, but things that have been difficult. The beauty of our system is that we send our missionaries out into churches to share their stories. And sometimes the difficult stories, as they are told, bring more and more clarity and more healing to the person as they realize that keeping it inside is not going to solve their dilemma of going forward. So sharing your story in a safe place, and I always have to emphasize the safe part of community, is very important and does bring healing.
Beth, can we pause for a moment? This is all excellent, but I think it's a good place to pause. To this point that you're making, and I want to get to the chat box also. So the point that you're making to share in a safe place, I would think also to share in a way that is ethical, that's kind, even if it's a very traumatic experience or experiences having gone through, you just don't want to just lay it all out there to anyone who will listen, I would think.
Exactly. That's the big caution, the red flag is every church is not a safe place. Every group is not a safe place. But as a person that has been abused, certainly they have to have trust. They have to learn where they can share, how much they can share, what's appropriate to share. Sometimes too much information overwhelms people that have not experienced what you have experienced. So again, the safest place to share, especially abuse situations, would be with other people who have either counseled or understood or who have been through it themselves.
So it's a trusted environment too, where the person is going to be keeping things confidential, so to speak, not throwing the feathers on someone's porch and then trying to gather them later after they've all scattered and blown away.
Exactly. And certainly not around strangers. I mean, that's something you don't know as well, as if you, too much information can be very harmful. So it's a balance. It's a balance of knowing that there's healing that comes through being honest, through sharing, but also knowing that information needs to be guarded and carefully placed.
Very good. So before we move on to the other elements you have here for treatment for spiritual abuse, we want to go back and we want to tackle some of the comments in the chat box. So Terry asks, and I'm going to direct this to you, Grant, do you know the names of the sermon titles? I suggested people go to the Central Assembly of God website and to look up those sermon titles. Do you happen to know the titles, Grant, or the Sundays? This was Sundays they were preached.
The Walking in the Light 2 weeks ago by Carter McDaniel. Walking in the Light. It was 2 weeks ago. And then last year, Pastor Bradford was talking about wolves and sheep clothes, and it was part of the series on Sermon on the Mount. And then there was one. Then
so 2 weeks ago, that'd be January the 5th, or would that have been December the 29th?
No, it's January.
Okay, January 5th, and
yeah.
Pastor Carter McDaniel's message. Okay.
Correct. 2 Sundays ago. And it was he walking in the light, and then he went through it, and then at the very end, then he spent about 15 minutes running through, okay, this, if we use this, we can help spiritual abuse be taken care of and be treated and help the spiritual abuser. Yes.
So if they wanted to find a Dr. Bradford's sermon, they could even write the church or call the church and have some help to zero in on what Sunday that was spoken.
He's done 2.
He's done 2. Okay, so those 2 sermons.
Yeah.
Very good. I'm sure they're excellent. So Amy asks, I found this one, but felt like it might be a series they're referring to. Amy, would you mind just speaking and just give us a little idea of what the website that you directed us to is zeroing on? It's been a bit, so we just make sure we put it in a context. You there, Amy? You are just unmute.
Hi guys, I'm not really in a place I can talk because I have my 2-year-olds watching Dora next to me, so I can listen. They might be really loud. I was just referring to I think it might have been handled. So there was the one from I think it was further back, not the ones you were mentioning, Dr. Jones, but So I also thumbnailed those, but somebody else posted a couple of links down below that clarified as well. So I think we're good there.
Okay, thank you,
Excellent.
Amy.
Yeah.
Again, you can go to the chat box and just take a screenshot of this website that Amy's provided for us, and thanks, Amy, for doing that. Then
Amen.
Tiffany says, I know he addressed it last year as part of the series. I believe that it was titled Turnarounds, but I can try to find the specific sermon. So Tiffany, I believe you're alluding to Dr. Bradford. Is that correct? If you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself just to confirm that.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Those were just a list of different links that people were finding about spiritual abuse that Dr. Bradford had spoken on. So yeah, I think these were older ones, like you said, than Amy, than what Dr. Jones had mentioned in a series on turnarounds that he also alluded to spiritual abuse. But yeah, thank you for bringing us those more updated options as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Tiffany. That's very helpful
Thank you.
too. So I'm going down here, and then we have, just as iPhone in brackets 120, there is a link to a YouTube video, and I'm sure it ties into the topic at hand. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Hand.
It's the turnaround sermon that was just referenced.
Okay.
From
Okay.
Central.
Thank you.
And then based on that sermon, George Wood did an influence podcast with Dr. Bradford on spiritual abuse. And that's also posted below.
Wonderful. Is this Alan?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I could give a very distinct voice. So thank you so much, Alan. That's
My pleasure.
very much appreciated. Okay. And okay, there's another one. So a couple of screenshots there. If you just want to peruse the chat for Alan under iPhone, you can take a screenshot and then go to those sermons as well. Okay, I'm going to, that's all we have. At least if I missed one, please pipe up and let me know. We have no sacred territory here. We want to make sure that you're heard. So Beth, will you please move ahead? And I think we're at number 9 here under treatment for spiritual abuse.
Right. Number 9, due to the misuse of Bible and theology, please seek out a spiritual director. This is something new for a lot of people in my denomination. But Mark has explained the difference between spiritual direction and counseling. And to have someone with solid theology to walk alongside of you as you recover from spiritual abuse would be about the highest thing right after a therapist and a doctor for a physical, that this would be like a third great foundation to have as you're walking through the healing process. And you can look on the Institute for Ministerial Wholeness and find places to find these kind of people. Mark is one of them. I'm going to just speak out for him because I think he's becoming very busy and doing spiritual direction, but he would certainly be able to help you find the right person and get help in this area.
Can I add something to that, Beth?
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, and I would say we're very thankful that we have a growing cadre of women and men who have been certified in spiritual direction. One of them is even on our webinar today, I noticed, Jackie Ranger. And so we are gathering a cadre of women and men that we're going to be able to bring into a place where they'll be vetted, and then from that, we'll have some people, at least with an Assemblies of God background. And of course, it doesn't need to be just limited to there, but if you're interested in that, let me know and be happy to talk to you or refer you to somebody. But yeah, so you can see that on the Institute for Ministerial Wholeness website under spiritual direction. But I just want to bring in the picture. We have others that we can refer people to, not just me. Thank you, Beth. Go ahead. Yes,
That's something to pay attention to, as well as these last 3 points that I want to give you are just very practical things to say. Again, whether it's you, whether it's a friend or a family member, pay attention to your surroundings, where you attend church, the kind of music that you listen to, what you're reading. There's so many triggers that we have from spiritual abuse. And we can be in a church setting, and sometimes it comes right back, whether it's the way maybe it comes through a sermon, maybe it comes through the music. Some kind of format in the church may hit you as a trigger. So be careful so many people may need to look at a different kind of community, like we talked at in the beginning, to stay in the place that you have received abuse, to me would not be a good idea. To make sure that you're putting yourself in a very healthy environment. Again, this can go back to some questions that you could have with a spiritual director to help you find places that would be healthy for you spiritually and emotionally, that will bring you joy and relaxation. That's what God has created us to enjoy. And if we're not, then something is certainly something is wrong. And then practice self-care. There's so many books and so many podcasts now on taking care of the physical, emotional, and spiritual body, and making sure that you're living a healthy lifestyle. Top of the list for me is always exercise. So many times people who are in uh, transition, whether it's, leaving one church and going to another church, or moving from one part of the country, leaving one ministry, going to another. Self-care is the one thing that gets lost in the shuffle. And certainly if you have experienced abuse, it's not going to be the kind of thing you may want to do, but your body is craving that. And if you can go outside and take a walk, get in the sunshine, be in nature, and just soak that up. That is one of the most healing things that you can do. This is a long list, but I say this is very practical, and something that if you've already incorporated this in your life and then you do encounter some kind of abuse or trauma, to have already learned to practice self-care, very, very important. Avoid negativity as well. I'm going to just throw that in, that practicing self-care, putting yourself with the right kind of people. This is another key to healing for whatever kind of abuse you've had, not to be with people who are going to make that abuse feel longer and more difficult, but to find people who are safe, people who are not full of negative reactions and interpretation, but people who can help you realistically recover. The last thing to think about is to remember that healing is a process. It may take time to recover from spiritual abuse, just like any kind of a surgery or illness. Spiritual abuse is right up there. It's maybe deeper than a surgery, because it's hit the very core of who you are. So to be patient with yourself at this time is primary. To know that the abuse took a long time. For many people, abuse goes on for a long, long time before they recognize that it's abuse. So in the same way, it may take a long time for that feeling of abuse to go away. You may have put yourself in a safe place. You may be surrounded with the right friends and you're in a new environment. But those feelings of abuse and the triggers that they bring may come for a long, long time. So I don't want to discourage you, but I want you to say, be patient with yourself. That's part of self-care, and to do the things that will bring healing and health and restore your joy. And that's the end of my notes, and we can go back to Mark.
Can I add a couple things real quick? Is that okay, Beth?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Um, one of the things that's really, I think, foundational to treating spiritual abuse is the counselor, psychologist, social worker, therapist must have a solid biblical background, a solid theological background. Because many of the verses that are used to manipulate and control individuals are taken out of context. And Kruger does a good job of pointing some of those out, as well as Johnson, showing where those scripture verses have been misused, mistreated. So there has to be an element of being able to discern the word correctly for the victim. And I stand by that, and I'm not, I mean, so many of the things that when I've been working through the years before it even became spiritual abuse, I realized the theology was what was keeping them really They wanted to follow the Lord. There's the rub. They want to be a great Christian. They want to follow the Lord. They want to be a good steward. They want to do what leadership says. And then all of a sudden there's this, how did I get here? This doesn't feel right. And if I go against it, I'm violating scripture. And so that's why I think that's where that gaslighting really is so devastating in spiritual abuse activities. So that just right off the bat would say, please, and we can make referrals for that. The other thing I want to say is I have said since 1990s, teaching at Evangel University, if you've ever been abused, you need counseling, period. Whether it's one time or multiple times. And so if you, and I'm going to, there's a spiritual abuse inventory that I post. And if you believe you've been spiritually abused, please seek counseling. It's sometimes you don't even know the adverse effect that it's had on you. And I've experienced that a lot within my circles. So yeah, please seek help if you have been spiritually abused, and also spiritual direction. It's not an either or. I think they're both in that regard.
Thank you very much, Grant. That's a great thing to add. I want to address a couple of items that have come into the chat. And Duncan says spiritual direction has been life-changing for me. My wife is a spiritual director with Soul Shepherding. That's an excellent group. And glad to see so many in our movement coming around to it. And yes, that is definitely happening. I believe it's definitely not just on the horizon, but really, really growing in our circles. And that is a very good thing, because it is not counseling, nor is it coaching, nor is it mentoring, but it is, I believe, with a trained person coming alongside and together hearing the voice of the Holy Spirit. It was life-changing for me as a pastor back in Chicago, when the church planted and pastored, and it continues to be. And then I just, when I had the time and the money, decided to go for my training certification, went to Southern Methodist University's Perkins School of Theology, and it was wonderfully evangelical, had a great experience there. But others that we are in contact with in our own Assemblies of God circles, various types of means of training and so forth. So I think that's an important component in it. It's not a life coach. It really is coming along and discerning the Spirit of God's guidance and leadership. And then Duncan also asked, wondering if you're able to give a quick summary of spiritual direction for those who don't know. I think probably the easiest thing for me to do, I'm just going to quickly go to the page on our Institute for Ministerial Wholeness website. So there's the top, there's this tab, and what is spiritual direction? And so it's just really a matter, if you want to grow in your faith journey and spiritual life, you might consider getting a spiritual director. Spiritual directors are dedicated to guiding people in the spiritual journey and helping them to explore matters of the soul, faith, and God. Spiritual direction is not coaching, mentoring, or counseling. Spiritual direction is a practice found in many faith traditions, and thankfully it's coming into the Assemblies of God, of which I'm part of that, and member and ordained in that faith tradition, and glad I am. And so anyway, these 10 items really came out of the cohort I was a part of. So for anyone actively seeking and traveling the spiritual journey, here are 10 reasons to get a spiritual director. Of course, these are not exhaustive, but one, and I find this, I do spiritual direction almost every day in afternoons each week, and I'm just amazed. I am amazed at what the Holy Spirit does in people's lives. I mean, it's incredible. I'm just in awe. But to explore and interpret your experiences of God. Number two, to integrate spirituality and practices into your daily life. So there's the assumption there's a life of spiritual formation that is going on in one's life who's seeking spiritual direction. But it's have someone come alongside and help discern. Sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees, and that person that comes along that's trained can help us with insights that the Spirit is wanting to speak into our lives. Number three, deepen your relationship with God. Four, make important decisions or changes. Let me say, with a director, a spiritual director, I do less talking and most listening. And the nomenclature of spiritual director is just the nomenclature of the industry, so to speak. We thought about changing it. You can call it spiritual friendship, spiritual counseling. But be that as it may, nobody's doing any directing and telling, no, you shouldn't do that unless you're driving off a cliff, of course. No, you should not do this, and you should do that, or you should go to this church, or you should leave this field, or you should buy this car. It's none of that kind of shepherding kind of thing. But the direction dynamic is the Spirit of God directing. What is God revealing in the direction? And then number 5, helping discover your purpose and calling in life. 6, share joys, fears, desires, and struggles in a safe environment. And I'd like to say that anything and everything that I believe any spiritual director hears, at least for me, is that I share it with no one. I don't go running to anybody's superintendent or to their regional director, their area director, their whomever, field director, their presbyter. It's between them, God, and me. And we want to keep it that way so people have the freedom to be able to express what's really on their hearts and their minds as God is leading them by his word and spirit. And then number 7, to spiritually heal from past wounds and hurts. That's been very rewarding to see. And then 8, receive the encouragement, guidance, and companionship that's needed. Jesus sent them out 2 by 2. I don't believe we're meant to go through our spiritual journey alone. And sometimes having a person who's in a director role is a safe person to have, who has no vested interest other than you and what the Spirit of God is doing in your life. Number 9, get spiritually unstuck. That's been very rewarding to see. And number 10, become who you were designed in body, mind, soul, and spirit to be. And one of the things that I do is I look at holistic formation, that we're not just spiritual beings, but we have to have physical health, as Beth has alluded to. The mind is our capacity to increase our mental capacity. And I lead people into contemplative prayer, which has been shown by the University of Pennsylvania to actually increase the synapses between the neurons of the brain. So it really is a Romans 12:1 experience to enter into contemplative prayer, and how that brings in silence and solitude such reverberating effects of compassion and spiritual sensitivity through the day beyond that time of contemplative prayer. The soul dynamic to me is relationships. When I started out in urban ministry in Chicago, the doors open to go on staff at an all-Black church in the heart of the South Side of Chicago. I come to find out that soul food was not a certain type of food; it was just Southern cooking. But the soul dynamic in soul food was the relationships that were built and the conversations that took place while eating the food. So I define soul as relationships, and I find so many pastors in particular don't have true friends, and they're wonderful people, and you're almost shocked when they say I don't have any real friends. But part of the work is also to help them glean true friendships. And of course, the spiritual dynamic, how they're being spiritually formed, talking about spiritual formation types of helps and so forth that a person can get into. One thing that we've added that I need to add to this is that we also look into the vocational area, how one is living out their call, no matter what that call may be in ministry, missions, or the marketplace. One of the things I do, I use discipleship dynamics to help people have an assessment where they do a rule of life in all 5 areas of body, mind, soul, spirit, and vocation. Because I believe that if we just look at the spiritual dynamic to the neglect of these other areas, we aren't holistically stewarding ourselves in Christ and in our families or in the body of Christ or to the unreached world in the most effective way we possibly can be. And that's really grown out of my own personal journey of by eating right and exercising, losing 80 pounds. I still have some more to go, but I am much healthier now at 66 than I was at 46. And so we really look at these aspects of how our total person and body, mind, soul, spirit, and vocation affect us collectively as a whole, so that we're stewarding our whole self. And so we work with people in developing a rule of life. I work with pastoral staffs, church boards now, ministry leaders, and it's something I practice myself. And I also have a spiritual director. And every spiritual director should have a spiritual director because we should practice what we preach. So in essence, thank you for that, Duncan, but that would be a place to go to find out a bit more detail. And if you'd like to schedule an appointment with me, I'd be happy to talk to you about it in further detail as well. Sean just asks, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, do we have a list of recommended counselors that we can refer people to? So Doctors Davis and Jones, I secede to you. What do you say about that? Can you help us? Can they write you and you can provide them something?
I would say yes, and I'm gonna go ahead and let Grant address that as well.
I was letting you address it first. I'm not aware of a list that I have put together. I know I haven't. Beth has probably
No,
been on top.
no, I wouldn't say a list either, Grant. I would say depending on the circumstances, I usually like to listen to what a person, where they're living, what they've experienced, if they're in ministry or not, and the different, and then try to match them with the appropriate person. I have done that, but I wouldn't say that I hand out a list.
I would like to start creating a list like that. Because I think treating spiritual abuse, just like we have, okay, treating phobias, treating depression, treating social anxiety, there are specialties that can be involved in that. Like for instance, complex PTSD and dissociative identity disorder. I do that. There are not a lot of people that do that. And I'm retiring this year, but I would like to start putting together a list and of counselors that feel comfortable treating spiritual abuse.
Mhm.
And I think Beth, you and I maybe can start kind of coordinating that and posting it and seeing what's out there for some people that are willing to do that or want to do that.
I think the wonderful thing about having internet is that we can probably find people in other places because
Yes.
it is a rather a specialty of a part of counseling that not everybody is doing or comfortable to be involved in. So
Right.
it is possible to find these places, and probably through some of the books that we're recommending, there could be places that we could find such a list. So good suggestion and a very good question. Thank you.
Amen.
That is a very good suggestion, and I'm glad to see you both are willing to tackle that. I think another thing from last year, Dr. Jones, would be to perhaps think about a group, a healthy group that could gather, a place to go to, and perhaps we can think and talk about that and what that might look like. Now we have
And Jackie Range, Agape Hope in Seattle is a good place. Absolutely. Praise God for them.
Thank you, Jackie, for sharing that. So take note of that, everyone. And then we also, Tiffany has mentioned, I know many of the AG districts have lists of counselors in districts, but as Dr. Jones mentioned, I don't know how many of them feel comfortable with counseling for spiritual abuse. So that would be something to take notice of for those of you that are Assemblies of God watching this, or if you're of another denomination and you watch this, I would encourage you to get in contact with your district headquarters or national headquarters and ask them if they have resources like this. I'm credentialed with the Illinois district, and I know that we do in Illinois have counselors. I would definitely like to see spiritual directors become a part of this as well. It'd be great if that would happen. I think eventually it will. And so I think that is the last two we have in the chat box.
Shonda Wilcox works military, so yes, we'll try to get at that list for you as well. Absolutely.
Excellent. Well,
And a support group, yeah. That's I own that. And I will see what I can do about getting that off the ground this year. And if anybody's on this webinar right now that is a counselor, can reach out and help put together stuff. Those that have been abused, spiritually abused, if we can start figuring out a way of creating a safe community, I want to do that. I don't necessarily, I'm good at Facebook stuff, but sometimes that's an entity that can be helpful, and invitation, that's where you're worried about who gets on it. But anyway, hey, that's my problem. We'll figure something out. And anybody that's listening, please get a hold of me, both if you want to be on this list of counselors and you're comfortable dealing with spiritual abuse, or you want to give some direction to help with a support group, please get a hold of me or Beth as well.
Thank you very much. If no one else has anything to put in the chat box, or even if you want to mute yourself and ask something or make a comment, we're going to bring this webinar to a conclusion. I want to thank Doctors Davis and Jones for being a part of this today, as well as last week. And then next week also, we are going to be having our part 3, where we are going to be talking with people in an anonymous way that have been abused. And unfortunately, our person who was an abuser and isn't anymore cannot be with us next week. So we are going to edit excerpts from what Lee Gerald, who actually was my supervisor in my spiritual direction program at Southern Methodist University. Wonderful man. He is said, yes, please feel free to take what I said last year and present that as well. So we're going to get that edited, and we're going to be playing excerpts of that for everyone on that webinar. And so with that, we want to thank you. If you know of anyone that this applies to, please push it out. This is recorded so on the cloud. So once we are finished, by the end of the day, we'll have this up on the Institute for Ministerial Wholeness website. It's under events and events archive. And so you can go into that and you can view it again, or you can pass it on to someone to view as well. And so thank you for your kind words, and praying for you all. And thank you so much. It's been great being with you all today. And hopefully we'll see you next Wednesday on the 22nd of January at 11 a.m. Central Time. So God bless you. And with that, we'll say goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.